Something has always felt right, but you've never been able to put your finger on it. A premonition that allows you to feel other people's vibes before they speak. There's been tension in the rooms you've entered, knowing that someone was in pain even when they smile by looking into their eyes. But you were never shown how to put your faith in that insight. However, you were instructed to pay attention to words, logic, and outward appearances. Thus, gradually, you became oblivious to the truth beneath. But the reality is that there are always people talking. By avoiding certain things, laughing too loudly, and looking away when the topic of conversation approaches reality. According to Carl Jung, actions reveal hidden meanings about our unconscious minds. There's a deeper meaning behind every mask we wear and every habit we repeat. A long-forgotten hurt, a long-repressed terror, a long-lost lie yearning to be revealed. Understanding people does not necessitate memorization of tricks. Silence is a signal, a pause, a change in tone. All you have to do is pay attention to the details that most people miss. Prior to responding, there is an overused tale of two protagonists. None of this is a coincidence. They are the physical manifestation of the thoughts that the mind denies. And once you master the art of attentive listening, you'll see that the vast majority of people aren't trying to trick you. For fear that no one will adore their true selves, they're concealing themselves. Judgment is not the point. Acknowledgement is key. Seeing people for who they really are, their defense mechanisms, rather than how they act, is the key. Moreover, when that realization, you also start to feel a softening on the inside. Why? Because deciphering the wounded's language allows you to feel what they're going through, rather than merely reading their words. As you experience them, you begin to perceive yourself more clearly. We learn to believe what others say, to nod in agreement when they speak beautifully, to respect self-assurance, and to assume that simplicity means candor. However, there's a more fundamental current, driven by survival rather than truth, that runs beneath the surface of most conversations. Carl Jung cautioned that it's common for individuals to. They have learned to be, rather than their true selves. A person's words are like a well-polished armor that shields their vulnerable soul. That is the paradox, by the way. Even the most seemingly calm people often have the most heavy loads. Whoever is perpetually smiling probably isn't happy, but they're scared they'll fade away if they're not. Even if they don't have much power, the one who takes over every room may be afraid of being forgotten. Even the most confident people often have the loudest doubts lurking behind their confidence. Behind closed doors. Let your mind wander to a dinner party where a woman bursts out laughing at a joke that hardly touched the target. She has excellent posture, her shoulders back, and she has practiced her stories well. Everyone is in awe of her composure. She subtly shortens her breath when someone brings up her childhood, grips her wine glass a little too tightly, and her eyes dart toward the exit, but no one notices these things as the room settles. These do not occur by chance. They signify the body's subtle defiance of the act. Jung. Every profound spirit needs a mask. But a mask is not a lie. It's a strategy. The soul's way of staying safe in a world that rarely knows how to hold depth without judgment. And the deeper truth is this. People aren't hiding to deceive you. They're hiding because they've never known what it's like to be fully seen and still loved. When you understand this, something shifts. You stop reacting to the mask, and you begin responding to the humanity underneath it. You learn to see not just through the mask, but through it too. It's not weakness that you find when you delve into people, but rather the hidden corners of your own being that are being reflected back to you. Carl Jung referred to this phenomenon as projection, and it's the unconscious mirror that the psyche holds up to the world, reflecting back the very traits we haven't accepted in ourselves. So, when someone can't stop criticizing arrogance, it might not be. Picture this. A man who constantly finds fault with emotional vulnerability, labeling it as weak, dramatic, and even attention-seeking. But hidden beneath his annoyance is a boy who once sobbed in front of someone he loved. When someone harshly condemns dishonesty, it could not be because they are moral paragons, but because they are avoiding a truth they are afraid to speak out. and endured constant ridicule because of it. Unfortunately, that wound has never healed. Now, whenever he encounters tenderness, it stirs up a dangerous side of him. In an effort to hide his pain, he mocks his past self. This is the tragic irony of human nature. We bury our fears, which we fear will never be accepted, and then we judge others for carrying the burdens we were forced to bury. However, if you observe closely, you'll notice a pattern. Our strongest reactions are seldom directed towards other people, but rather they are reflections of our own inner selves. And this is the crux of the matter. A person's criticisms are not merely opinions, but rather maps leading directly to their shadow. By learning to read these maps with compassion instead of judgment, you'll gain insight into not only their identity, but also their fears and insecurities. Jung understood that the most revealing truths often slip between the cracks of people's words, which is a language we have forgotten how to decipher. The power of silence lies in its ability to convey meaning beyond words alone. Even when someone speaks with great eloquence, the smallest pauses, subjects skipped, and smiles used to avoid awkward questions can convey a great deal. When someone avoids sharing a personal story, it's not because it doesn't matter, but because it holds too much weight. Picture this. You're sitting across from someone who appears composed and articulate. They laugh at the perfect moments, nod courteously, and says all the right things that sound good. But when you inquire, what was? At that point in your life, their smile disappears for a split second. They look sideways and say, "It was fine." In that imperceptible moment lies the truth. The emptiness that follows their words is heavy with what they were unable to express. This isn't a weakness, but a protective instinct. The mind guards what it still considers unsafe to reveal. But if you listen softly without attempting to fix or force, you'll start to hear what's underneath. Because when someone becomes quiet, it's not. It's always avoidance. It's often grief, shame, or memory rising like smoke in the room. Jung saw language as a defense of the collective self, a way people shield themselves from becoming too visible. But silence strips the mask. It allows the unconscious to breathe. If you want to read someone, watch what their silence circles around. It will point you to the places they don't yet feel worthy of bringing into the light. Doing so will teach you the most important truth of all. People are not hiding because they are being unethical. They remain quiet because they're still in the process of healing. There is a subtle danger in individuals who appear overly confident in their righteousness. Jung noted that when morality is overly displayed, it tends to lose its essence. What we refer to as virtue can subtly transform into something performance-based, a means to avoid the more difficult task of introspection. When someone is continually scolding others, lecturing with unyielding conviction, or asserting their moral superiority, it may seem admirable, but upon closer inspection, a different story may be revealed. One of the most alluring masks that the will to dominate can take is purity, but not purity of heart, but purity of image. It's easier to condemn others than to face one's own shadow. For example, consider a man who talks a good game about compassion and writes lengthy posts about kindness, but who is unable to tolerate dissent. When challenged, his voice becomes more aggressive and his posture changes, and you see that he is actually defending control, not compassion. He needs to appear good because he is afraid of facing his own shadow, the parts of himself that he despises. We've all met this kind of person, and maybe, if we're being really honest, we've all been this kind of person at some point. Putting appearances before substance, choosing to be perfect rather than authentic or humble. But true goodness is unassuming. It doesn't require attention. It exists in the way someone treats others when no one is looking. Those who truly embody kindness don't brag about it. They're not trying to prove it. They just live it. Jung reminded us that the soul is not. Sincerity, not admiration, is what it seeks. The next time someone brags about their virtue, ask yourself what they're trying to hide. For every show of superiority, there's a hidden hurt, a part of oneself that needs forgiveness. The most deceitful lies aren't spoken aloud, but whispered to one's self at night. According to Jung, self-deception isn't about being malicious, but about protecting one's self from realities that one isn't emotionally prepared to confront. When someone claims to be fine while their smile falls short of their eyes, or when they claim to have moved on but blush at name, it's not manipulation, but a defense mechanism veiled in hope. People don't lie, but they invent stories to make themselves feel better. A woman who never felt safe as a child might convince herself that she doesn't need intimacy at all. A man who was told to be tough might believe that showing emotion is weak, even though he's physically hurting from suppressing it. These stories serve as defense mechanisms, become the framework of their character. Half-truths woven with survival. But no matter how carefully scripted, the truth seeps through. It manifests in their silences, in the way they shift the conversation, in the guarded way they smile when happiness ought to be abundant. Picture yourself across from someone who insists they aren't hurt, but whose voice tightens whenever they bring up the past. They aren't being dishonest. They're simply repeating the lies they've had to believe in order to survive. This is the delicate paradox of reading people. If you want to decipher someone's lies, don't judge them. Instead, try to understand why they told them. Behind every lie is a truth that was once too painful to bear alone. Once you realize that a wall was built to protect something fragile, not to isolate you, but to help you, then you can stop demanding honesty and start offering safety. Because healing doesn't come from exposing someone's false story, but from allowing them the space to rewrite it when they're ready. Music, sometimes the person with the loudest voice is also the one who needs it. Jung uncovered a truth that few are willing to acknowledge, that often what appears as superiority is actually a mask for insecurity. This armor is built not from arrogance, but from a haunting doubt that says, "You're not enough." When someone feels the need to remind the world of their greatness, it's rarely because they truly feel it. Rather, it's because they fear being forgotten and overcompensate, much like a child dressing up in a royal gown. The coworker who can't let a meeting go by without interrupting to prove their knowledge. The friends who post perfect photos on social media, each one a silent plea for reassurance. Or maybe you too, caught in the subtle urge to outdo, assert, and be seen favorably. The need to dominate, correct, and boast is rarely based in malice, more often in a need to be perceived positively. Looking past the performance, we can sometimes see the child who was once silenced, overlooked, or made to feel invisible. And that changes everything. You no longer see a person trying to win. You see a person trying to heal. The more we recognize this, the less we take things personally. The more we sense the trembling behind the bravery. Jung didn't ask us to judge this behavior. He asked us to understand it. As we gain throne, we are able to offer more compassion. Reading someone's mind isn't about reducing them. Rather, it's about opening your eyes to the hidden parts of their character. And when you do that, something else opens up in your own heart. You stop being fooled by their mask and fear the truth. Fear isn't loud. Rather, it murmurs through habits, hides behind politeness, and walks alongside us dressed as reason. Jung realized that a lot of our personality traits are actually just patterns of defenses, an effort to protect ourselves. It's been said that self-assurance, decisiveness, and clarity are admirable qualities in others. However, what if, beneath these masks, people are really just trying to protect themselves from being hurt again? For example, a guy who talks too much in conversations might not be looking for connection, but rather approval to exist. Similarly, a dominant woman might not be seeking attention, but rather the fear of being invisible. Lastly, someone who vanishes without a trace, who turns invisible when tensions rise, could not be. Some people may be rejecting you, but they may be trying to protect the part of themselves that hasn't been broken yet. I once heard a story about a woman who said yes to everything and everyone until she woke up one day with no idea what she wanted anymore. Her life appeared full, but she felt empty. And that's the thing about fear. It hides as helpfulness, charm, and productivity. But underneath it all is the fear of abandonment rejection, or not being enough. When you start viewing people through this lens, you stop judging and begin to understand their vulnerabilities. The invitation from Jung was not to expose others, but to awaken a deeper compassion for the world and the parts of yourself that once needed it. It is a subtle but sacred shift that starts with witnessing, moving on to asking what pain is this protecting, rather than why are they like this. This shift opens your eyes not only to others but also to yourself, because chances are you've lived behind your own performance as well. Saying yes when you meant no, smiling when you wanted to cry, and staying silent when your truth trembled in your throat. Additionally, criticism can take many forms, such as sarcasm, correction, or opinion, but at its core, it often reveals an unwillingness to face our own shadow sides. Carl Jung saw projection as more than just a defense mechanism. It also leads back to the shadow. When someone speaks harshly of another, particularly when doing so with urgency or repetition, it is rarely about the person being judged. Rather, it is about the disowned part of the speaker's own self-image pleading for attention. For example, consider a man who rolls his eyes whenever someone cries. Seeing vulnerability in others makes him feel weak. It's not that she finds fault with other people's looks, but that she can't handle looking in the mirror at her own. This isn't hate, but rather the projection of her own pain onto others. We all have secrets that we've buried, places where we've told ourselves we're wrong, unlovable, or ashamed. Instead of facing these issues, we attack others when we perceive their weaknesses, but in doing so, we expose our own scars. One man once said, "My father called everyone lazy." It's why repeated criticism is never neutral. It's a mirror reflecting what the speaker cannot sit with inside. The key to understanding projection is to remember that it is more than just a distortion. It is a confession disguised. The next time someone's criticism seems excessive, hurtful, or inappropriate, take a moment to reflect before responding. Consider what the critic is trying to suppress. The answer will provide more than just insight. Their confidence, which seems more like a mask than a presence, is something you've probably encountered. You know the one. They walk into a room with their shoulders back, their voice steady, and their answers written down before the question is even asked. On the outside, they seem composed, but under their polished exterior, they're the hum of insecurity. This experience will teach you to read people with empathy instead of assumptions. And in that moment, you start to see the wound beneath the mask, waiting to be met with grace rather than judgment. Strain like a taut wire. Carl Jung said that false confidence is more often a monument to guilt than mastery. Not the punishing kind of guilt, but the quieter kind that haunts, the kind that says, "You're not who they think you are," and demands performance to drown it out. Consider a teacher or manager who never says, "I don't know," or someone who dominates every meeting, never letting others breathe. From the outside, they seem certain. But if you look closely, you'll see that they're hiding their true feelings of shame and humiliation. You'll notice their defensiveness when challenged, or how they over-explain minor decisions to show they've accomplished enough. That's not clarity, it's penance. Maybe they're haunted by a past mistake, or were taught that love is earned only through perfect control. Either way, their confidence isn't rooted in peace. It's built like a fortress to conceal a deeper truth. And here is where Jung's wisdom lies. True peace does not require formality. It doesn't seek applause or armor itself in certainty. It simply exists quiet, grounded, and open. So when you meet someone who seems unshakably confident, look past the gleam. Ask gently within yourself, what are they trying to prove and to whom? Because once you stop being intimidated by someone's perfection, you begin to see the longing behind it. The part of them still searching for redemption beneath the applause. There's a strange thing that happens when people speak too loudly about something they claim not to care about. It's not the volume of their voice that reveals them, but the force behind their certainty. Carl Jung once observed that exaggeration is not a sign of conviction, but of conflict. A soul wrestling with something too close to name. When someone insists again and again, "I don't need anyone," or "I've never been happier," what you're hearing is not the truth, but armor. Exaggeration is not confidence turned up. It is insecurity trying to drown itself out. Imagine a man who tells every room he walks into that he's unbothered by criticism, who laughs at every disagreement with rehearsed ease. At first glance, he seems untouched, even invincible. But pay attention to the way he overcompensates, the way he corrects others mid-sentence or lingers just a second too long on his own praise. That's not indifference. It's fear wearing a mask of certainty. Jung understood that the psyche, when unbalanced, veers toward extremes as a way to protect its most vulnerable truths. And so the more absolute the statement, the more fractured the foundation. Real security whispers. It doesn't shout. Real joy doesn't need an announcement. So the next time someone proclaims, "I'm always fine," ask yourself, not out loud, but inwardly, what part of themselves are they trying to silence? Because it is in the things people repeat too often, too intensely, that their hidden story begins to emerge. And when you learn to read exaggeration as an echo of suppressed emotion, you stop hearing the words and start hearing the wound. Beneath the rigid need to control, there's often a fragile world quietly unraveling. Carl Jung taught that the more someone grasps at order on the outside, the more they are usually battling a storm within. Control is rarely about strength. It is about fear disguised as structure. Think of the person who cannot rest unless everything is in place. The bed perfectly made, the email answered instantly, the dinner scheduled down to the minute. They seem disciplined, composed, and reliable. But watch closely, and you'll see the toll. The sleepless nights when plans shift. The rising panic when something unexpected interrupts the routine. This isn't an order, it's survival. Jung saw this pattern not as a flaw, but as a mirror, the outer rigidity reflecting an inner dissonance too loud to bear. One woman, for example, insisted on controlling every part of her family's vacation, from departure times to walking routes, until her teenage son finally asked, "Why are you always so tense on trips that are supposed to be fun?" Her silence said everything. Control had become her way of holding herself together, of anchoring a part of her she had long abandoned to fear. The realization is sobering. People who demand control aren't trying to dominate you. They're trying to stop themselves from falling apart. So when you meet someone who must dictate, organize, or command every detail, ask not what are they trying to manage, but what chaos are they afraid to feel. Because the tighter the grip, the more fragile the soul underneath. Music. There's a peculiar loneliness that comes not from isolation, but from performance. Carl Jung understood that when a person becomes more invested in being seen than in being known, they lose themselves in the mirror of others. In today's world, this mirror has multiplied. Every post, every pose, every curated caption becomes a plea disguised as pride. The psychological challenge here is subtle but haunting. When someone performs too much, it's rarely because they feel full. It's because they feel unseen. The performance is not a celebration of confidence, but a camouflage of emptiness. Imagine a man who is the life of every party, who never misses a chance to tell a joke, make a toast, or turn heads with his stories. People call him magnetic, but his laughter often arrives a second too late. And when no one's watching, his shoulders fall like a curtain dropping after a final act. Once, after delivering an animated speech at a friend's birthday, he sat quietly on the stairs outside, staring into the night. A passerby asked if he was okay. He smiled and said, "It's just quiet now. That's all." And in that silence lived the truth. His identity had become a stage, and the applause was the only thing reminding him he existed. Jung's wisdom pierces through moments like this, not to shame the performance, but to help us see its root. Those who shout the loudest for attention are often those who fear they'll disappear without it. The performance then is not arrogance, but ache. And when we learn to see this, when we look past the polish and into the quiet, the world changes. We begin to listen differently, not just to words, but to what the soul is trying to say through the noise. We stop reacting to the show and start responding to the self that is terrified no one will ever see past it. This is the gift of seeing clearly, not to critique what someone shows, but to understand what they hide. And when you understand that, you no longer take things so personally. You stop chasing approval or fearing rejection because you realize everyone is performing something. The key is learning which parts are rehearsed and which parts are real. And that begins by looking inward first. The next time someone raises their voice in debate, not with anger, but with trembling certainty, pause. Pause before you counter, before you correct, and before you defend. Because what often speaks isn't just their opinion, it's their protection. Carl Jung taught that people do not speak from pure logic, no matter how sharp their arguments may appear. They speak from the places they were never allowed to grieve, from the moment their trust was fractured, from the day they were told that hope was naive or that dreams were foolish. The emotional challenge here is profound, to realize that beneath every strong belief is often a quiet injury. Take the man who claims with a rehearsed scoff people are only out for themselves. On the surface, it sounds cynical, even arrogant. But if you look closer, what you'll see is the boy who trusted too easily, who once believed in promises that were broken, who gave his heart without knowing it could be dropped. His logic is a fortress built brick by brick. From past betrayals, he doesn't truly want to believe the worst in people. He's just not sure he can survive being wrong again. This is the hidden architecture of human belief. Emotion laid beneath intellect. Pain disguised as philosophy. And the truth is we all do it. We all build stories to keep the ache at bay. We all wrap old wounds in new words and call them principles. So when someone rejects love, mocks faith, or ridicules vulnerability, don't assume you're witnessing arrogance. More often, you're witnessing someone trying to stay safe. And when you learn to read that, when you listen not to the argument but to the ache, it softens something inside you. You stop needing to be right. You stop needing to prove, because now you understand that belief isn't always about truth. It's about survival. And behind every defended worldview is often just a heart trying not to be broken again. When you see people through this lens, compassion is no longer a choice. It's the natural response. You speak more softly. You listen longer. You begin to heal in the very act of witnessing someone else's hidden war. And that's what Jung wanted for us. Not just to decode the mind, but to remember the soul that still trembles behind it. There's a certain moment, a quiet, often overlooked one, when the mask slips just enough to reveal what power truly means to someone. It's not in how they speak to those who impress them, nor how they present when praised. It's how they respond when someone stumbles, when someone cries in front of them, or fails publicly. Jung believed that the soul reveals itself not in moments of triumph, but in how we meet weakness in others. The emotional challenge here lies in the mirror when another's vulnerability confronts us. Do we rush to fix it, judge it, mock it, or do we have the courage to simply witness it? Picture a man in a meeting, polished and authoritative, who watches as a junior colleague nervously fumbles their words. The room grows tense. A few smirks, a few averted eyes. Then, without saying much, he gently redirects the conversation. Not to rescue, not to assert dominance, but to preserve the dignity of someone less practiced in this arena. That moment isn't small. It's seismic, because it shows he doesn't draw strength from superiority. He draws it from presence. The truth is, those who shame others for their weakness have rarely sat with their own. Their cruelty is not confidence. It's a shield. But the ones who no longer need to punish, who no longer need to win at someone else's expense, have crossed an invisible threshold. They have looked their own sorrow in the eye and made peace with it. So now, when they see someone faltering, they don't react. They relate. And that changes everything. If you want to truly read someone, don't just listen to how they speak about success. Watch how they treat what's raw, what's messy, what reminds them of their own unfinished wounds. Because that's the real test of character. Not in how someone commands a room, but in how gently they hold what the world has broken. Sometimes the loudest people echo a silence they have never chosen. Beneath the sparkle of flamboyant clothes, the endless anecdotes that circle back to them, the constant need to outshine the moment. There's often a quieter truth, a fear that stillness might erase them. Carl Jung understood this haunting hunger not as vanity, but as the residue of emotional absence. When someone was once invisible to the people who mattered most, they may grow into an adult who feels safest only when seen. But being seen isn't the same as being known. And so the more they fear vanishing, the more noise they create to stay alive in the room. Imagine a woman who arrives early to every gathering, overdressed, overprepared, and always with a story so perfect it feels scripted. She laughs just a second too loud. She interrupts, not out of rudeness, but urgency, like she's trying to prove she belongs before the moment slips past her. Most people see her as dramatic. But if you listen closely, what you'll hear is a child tapping on the glass of the adult world, asking, "Am I still here if no one's watching?" This is the tragedy behind attention-seeking. It's not about ego. It's about existence. The emotional challenge, then, is not to criticize or retreat from people like her, but to understand the ache underneath their performance. Because when someone is terrified of silence, it's often because silence was once filled with abandonment. And the irony is this: the more they perform, the further they drift from what they truly seek. Not eyes, not applause, but presence. A quiet, grounded presence that says, "I see you," even when you're not shining. There's a peculiar ache that rises not from being attacked, but from being misunderstood by those who secretly admire what they cannot yet claim. Carl Jung taught that the sharpness of envy is not hatred in disguise, but longing that has forgotten its own name. When someone lashes out, diminishes, or mocks another person's light, what we often miss is the buried recognition. That could have been me if I'd let myself believe it was possible. This is why envy so often wears the mask of cruelty. It's easier to tear down what inspires us than to face the grief of not becoming it ourselves. Imagine a man who rolls his eyes every time a colleague speaks with conviction. He calls her arrogant, jokes about her needing attention, and always finds a way to point out her flaws. But if you trace the tension in his voice, it leads to a chapter of his life where he once spoke with that same certainty until someone laughed and he decided never to risk it again. Now, when he sees her unapologetic voice, it awakens the ghost of who he could have been. Envy is never just about the other person. It's about the unlived life within us, the freedom we denied, the courage we once silenced, the truth we buried to stay safe. And so when you're attacked, pause before defending yourself. Ask instead, what part of me reminds them of something they abandoned? Likewise, when you catch yourself judging someone harshly for shining, dancing, daring, ask, what are they doing that I wish I had the permission to do? In that moment, envy transforms from poison into revelation. And if you're brave enough to look through its mirror, you may find not a rival, but a version of you still waiting to be reclaimed. The greatest illusion of adulthood is that we are free. But Carl Jung uncovered a deeper truth. We are not as autonomous as we imagine. We are echoes. We don't act from logic as much as we act from memory. Not the kind stored in facts, but the kind buried in the nervous system. Most people are not expressing their beliefs. They are reliving their childhood roles with new faces and fancier vocabulary. Watch closely and you'll see it. The woman who always anticipates everyone's needs before they speak was likely once a child whose survival depended on reading the emotional weather in a room before the storm hit. The man who cannot ask for help, who always offers a joke instead of a need, likely learned that vulnerability came with punishment or rejection. These patterns are not random. They are rehearsals we were forced to perfect, and without awareness, we just keep performing them, hoping the ending will be different this time. But the tragedy is this. When you don't know the origin of your script, you believe it is your personality. You think you're just independent or just emotionally reserved, when in fact, you are carrying a story that was never fully yours to hold. One man once shared how he prided himself on being stoic and never needing anything from anyone. But when asked about his past, his face softened. "When I was little, I remember waiting by the window for my father's car, promising myself I wouldn't cry this time when he didn't show. That boy never wanted to be stoic. He just didn't want to be disappointed anymore. And now, as a man, his silence is not peace, it's protection. When you begin to read people not just through their present behavior, but through the child they had to become, everything changes. You stop taking things personally. You stop mistaking defense for defiance, arrogance for safety, and coldness for fear. The path to truly understanding someone is paved with the question, what did they have to survive to become this? And if you ask it gently enough, you may hear not just the story of their past, but the secret of their healing. Somewhere deep within you, something has stirred. Not a conclusion, but a quiet return. As you've moved through these truths, you haven't just learned how to see others. You've remembered how to feel. You've walked through the corridors of behavior and uncovered the rooms where people still keep their younger selves locked away, untouched by time, but shaped by survival. This journey was never just about reading others. It was about listening with the kind of presence that heals. Because to truly see someone is not to analyze them, but to witness them with the kind of compassion that does not flinch when it touches pain. You've discovered that every defense is a doorway, every habit a whisper, every reaction a memory that wasn't resolved but rehearsed into adulthood. And now, perhaps for the first time, you realize what you once judged, you now understand. What you once feared in others, you now meet with grace. And in doing so, you no longer just interpret the world. You soften it. This is the power Jung spoke of. Not the power to outwit, but to outlove. I want to be the presence that doesn't correct, but reflects. Not to fix people, but to see them so clearly that they begin to see themselves. There's a kind of quiet strength that rises when you no longer need to defend or decode because you've recognized the shared script from which we're all acting. From the loudest performer to the quietest one in the corner, we are all in some way asking the same question. Am I still worthy if I don't pretend? So let this be your answer, not in words, but in presence. Be the still lake that reveals the reflection. Be the pause in the noise. Be the one who stays soft in a world that taught you to armor up. Because the deeper you listen, the more clearly you will hear the sacred truth hidden beneath every pattern. We're not so different, and perhaps that is the most powerful insight of all. Not that you've learned to read others, but that in doing so you've begun to remember who you truly are. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home? Or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation. That is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born.